Welcome back to the Candy Corn Quilt Shop Quilt Along. We're on the week of September 29th. We're going to be working on the sewing machine, thimble flowers, pumpkin pincushions, and solid dress form blocks. I've got all my materials prepped and ready to go. I went over this at the end of last week's video. Since we're making 3 of the same blocks for the pumpkin pincushions, I'm going to start off with those today. They're on the quilt here, here, and here. Each of these blocks needs 2 fabrics, an A and B, your background, your batting, and a piece of Flexi Foam. The batting should be cut at 5.5 inches square because these are going to be trimmed to 4.5 inches square. I went through all my choices at the end of the video last week. Refer to the instructions if you're using the fabric kit. Let's go ahead and get started. I've got my light mesh cutaway loaded in a 9.5 by 14 inch hoop, hand tightened and screwdriver tightened. Let's head over to the machine. I'm working with my own threads. I'll go over my thread colors and choices as we progress through the blocks. If you're interested in making a fabric wrapped rope bowl like this, I'll link that video below. I'm on a baby lock meridian. Everything is on USB. I've created a folder for each one of my pumpkins. Let's go ahead and drop in the background quilting first. These are the same steps we've been doing, so you've probably seen this before. We'll step through this one really quick. I've got the pumpkin 1. I'm going to move it up. I'm going to add. We'll go to our pumpkin 2. And then we'll go to pumpkin 3, and I might need to move them around for spacing. We'll see after I drop them all in. You can actually line them all up top to bottom. It's pretty tight though. You'll notice pumpkins 1 and 3 have the same background quilting. I think what I'd like to do, slide them like this, all the way to the side, all the way to the top corner, and then this one all the way to the side over here. That gives me nice space between each of these, so I'll be able to get in and do all of my trimming. Now we need to add our embroidery blocks. Each block is going to need a pumpkin. It's the same pumpkin for each block. When I created my folders, I did drop a block in with each folder, but you can actually duplicate the pumpkin. What's going to set it apart at the end is this little needle right here, and then this one right here. There's buttons that go on top of these. One of them will have bats, one has flowers, and I believe the other one has ghosts. So this block is going to stitch out the same. We need to make 3 of those. I'm going to grab one, and instead of going all the way out and going back to USB and going into each of the folders, I know this block is the same. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate it and bring it down here, and one more. Just makes the process go a little bit faster. They all look pretty centered to me. I'm good with that. I am going to save this to my machine in case something happens, which always seems to happen when I film. We are ready to go. We're going to start with background quilting. I have a neutral thread on my machine. The first thing that's going to stitch is the batting placement line for my pumpkin in the upper left corner. Go ahead and cover that with your batting and then stitch the tack down line. Trim away your extra batting. Once that's trimmed, you want to stitch your fabric placement line for your background fabric. If you've got a light colored fabric, check the back, dog hair, cat hair, whatever. Make sure there's nothing on the back. Go ahead and cover that placement line, and then we'll stitch the tack down. For my background quilting, I'm going to use this white glow-in-the-dark thread. I wanted to share a close-up look at the background quilting. The thread is white, but when you stitch it on white like this, it shows up as gray. Something to keep in mind if you're using the same threads. The first block is done for the background quilting. I've got 2 more to do. I'll go ahead and set those to music, and then we'll slow down and work together when we do the applique. We'll be working with Flexi Foam today. I can see my needle's going to catch the corner of this block. Technically, it doesn't matter. It's going to get trimmed at the end, but I'm going to go ahead and trim off this piece. I'm done with the background quilting for the second one. I'm going to go ahead and cut out this corner here and cut out this corner here, just so nothing gets in the way going forward. I've got all my background quilting complete. I'm going to go ahead and trim off this corner, make sure that's out of the way. switch to a neutral thread, and we're going to start working on our pumpkins. I went forward in the instructions. I'm actually going to put my orange thread on the machine instead of a neutral thread. We're going to be working with our pumpkin fabric. You can use a neutral thread. This will just save me a step. I have my orange thread on my machine. I also switched to a full bobbin. We'll work through this pumpkin together, and the other two I'll set to music because it's going to be the same exact stitch out. Go ahead and make sure you've got your correct thread on your machine, and we're going to stitch the placement line. I've got a piece of Flexi Foam, a piece of tape. If you don't have Flexi Foam, you can use Soft and Stable. If you don't have that, you can double up your batting. This is just going to make your block a little bit puffy. You want to make sure you cover that placement line. Keep an eye on your machine because this is a puffy product. It can shift while it's stitching out. You don't want to walk away and come back to a big giant mess. We're going to stitch the tack down line. Go ahead and remove your tape, and then we're going to trim everything that's outside of the tack down line. Once you have that trimmed, we're going to stitch the fabric A placement line. The placement line has stitched out. We want to refer to our diagram. If you're working with two fabrics and you want one of them front and center, that is your fabric B, not fabric A. Our fabric A is over on the side here, here, and this little bit in the back. So whichever fabric you want to be fabric A, go ahead and get that one pulled out. I have these two fabrics. I want this one with the little dots to be front and center, so that's going to be my fabric B. I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to use this as my fabric A. In the instructions, it does have this piece of fabric cut as 3.5 by 3. I was working with a charm pack, so I just put my fusible on the back, did the whole thing, made it easier on myself so I didn't have to make any extra cuts. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I tape that down because this is puffy. We want it held in place. Make sure you've covered your placement lines. And then we're going to stitch the tack down for our fabric A. My tack down lines are all stitched out. You want to keep this half moon of fabric, this half moon of fabric, and the little triangle at the top. You can refer back to the picture if you need to. So we're keeping fabric A. This part here, here, and back there. I've got this trimmed. A couple of tips, at least things that helped me. The first thing I did were the outside lines, and then instead of trying to get my scissor underneath to go along this way and go along this way, I actually cut a line right up the middle, and then I had a little bit of fabric here and a little bit here, and I was able to hold that piece and then trim this curve and that curve. We're going to put this back on our machine, and we're going to stitch out the fabric B placement lines. I've got my fabric B. Again, I'm working with a charm square, so my piece of fabric might look bigger than yours if you cut according to the directions. Going to go ahead and tape that down, and then we're going to stitch out the fabric B tack down line. Once those lines have stitched out, we need to trim our fabric. We want to keep this piece here on the side, the center, and here on the side. I have everything trimmed. I used my little snips. I tried to get as close as possible, but I can still see some of the fabric edges. We're going to be stitching the satin detail next. I have to hold the camera to get this close, but can you see the gaps in the stitching? I'm hoping that the gaps don't show like that on the stitch out, but if it does, there's really not much I can do about it. It looks like it's just part of the stitch out. We're going to stitch the Pincushion 1 satin outline, and after that stitches, we're actually going to switch colors and stitch the stem and then go back and stitch the rest of the detail on the pumpkin. I'm only using one color of orange throughout. They're using a light orange and a dark orange, so if you're following their thread coloring, please refer to your instructions. Make sure you've got the correct orange. The satin stitching is all done. It looks pretty good. I do think I have a couple of gaps in the stitching, but that's okay. I expected that. I'm going to switch to green. This is the bright green I'm using. Believe it or not, this is not glow in the dark. It's just really bright. We're going to stitch out the stem and the little squiggle next to the stem. Switch back to the orange thread that you're using, and we're going to stitch out the last bit of the pumpkin detail in the center. That part is all stitched out. See how the Flexi Foam makes it kind of squishy? Not not so much in the outer parts. It almost gets more squishy as it goes toward the center. The next thing we're going to stitch are the pins and the needle coming out of the top of our pincushion. I'm going to use this gray glow-in-the-dark thread. Refer to the instructions to check for which gray they're using. I believe they use both a light gray and a dark gray. My pins and needle have stitched out. The next thing it's going to stitch is what they're calling a pincushion divot. I believe they're using the dark orange for that. It's a small line that goes underneath each one of your pins and the needle. If you think of a pincushion, when you put a pin in, it kind of squishes it. It's to give that illusion of the squishiness. I'm just going to go back to my regular orange. I'm only using one orange. The next thing that's going to stitch is thread detail. That looks like it's in probably the light orange. My printout doesn't have the colors correct, so make sure you're referring to your file if you're following their guide. I'm going to just leave my orange on the machine for that. We've got two more things to stitch out. We've got a pinhead up here, and then there'll be another pinhead down here. They have one in orange and one in purple. Since my background has orange polka dots, I'm going to go ahead and stitch both of them in purple. That way they don't get lost in the background. Here's the purple that I'm using. That's it for the first pumpkin. We've got two more to stitch. I'm going to go ahead and do these two off camera. It's the exact same series of steps. We'll trim all our blocks together at the end. The next block we're going to stitch out is the solid dress form. This also has the Flexi Foam. Then we'll work on Thimble Flowers in the sewing machine. If you've got a big enough hoop, you can fit all three of those blocks in one hoop. You might have to flip one sideways. And I can do that in the big hoop on my machine, but I want to work through these one at a time. Let's work on the solid dress form. Put down our quilting file first, and then we'll add our embroidery file. Got my neutral thread on my machine. We're going to go through the same steps for the background quilting. This is my background fabric, the one with the black and the orange spiders. For my background quilting, I'm going to use this pink glow-in-the-dark. I don't have an orange glow-in-the-dark, but this will look good with the dress form. I kind of stretched it over and had a look at it. I'll go ahead and move through that part with music, and then we'll pick up again when we're working on the embroidery and the applique. Background quilting is all done. I'm going to switch to black. We're going to stitch out the dress stand detail. Next, we're going to stitch out the placement line for the shape form. Grab your shape form, piece of tape, make sure you completely cover that placement line, and then stitch out the tack down, and then trim. Next, after you trim, you're going to stitch the placement line for your dress fabric. You want to place your dress fabric over that placement line and tack it down. I'm actually going to take mine off the machine. Since I have a stripe, I want to make sure I try and lay it straight and I don't get it crooked, because it'll drive me nuts if it's crooked. I added extra tape to this because I want to try and keep that fabric in place. Cross your fingers. Let's stitch our tack down line. Once that's stitched, remove any tape. We're going to trim everything outside that line. That came out pretty good. I'm not sure I could get that more centered if I tried. I'm going to put this back on the machine. We're going to stitch the satin outline, and that's going to be it for this block today. There will be embellishments that we're going to add later. Our dress block is done. I'm going to set this aside. We're going to do the Thimble Flowers next. Let's get our Thimble Flowers loaded. We'll start with the background quilting. I'll go ahead and set that to music just like before. We've done that quite a few times already. I'm going to go ahead and set that. And then let's add our block. You can see that it's stitching sideways in order to fit in the 5x7 hoop. My background fabric for this is dark, so I'm going to leave my black thread on the machine as I step through this, and I'm trying to figure out which color to pick for background quilting. I want to do a glow-in-the-dark thread, but I don't have a black glow-in-the-dark thread. So when we get to the background quilting, I'll stop and I'll show you which color I picked. Next up is our fabric tack down. This has all different colors in the background. I'm going to go with the green for my background quilting. This is one of the glow-in-the-dark colors. The background quilting is all done. The next thing we're going to stitch is the little flower stem that comes out of the thimbles. I'm going to use the white glow in the dark, and again, this stitches out kind of gray. I want to make sure that this does stand out from the background. My little stem is all stitched out. The next thing we're going to stitch is the placement line for the thimbles. Our thimbles are going to be this embroidery leather if you're working with the embellishment kit. If not, gray or silver fabric is going to work just fine. For the placement line, I'm going to use my regular silver thread. Once we've placed our embroidery leather, it's going to do the tack down and the detail stitching at the same time. When I get to that part, I'm going to switch to the glow-in-the-dark gray. I'm putting my regular gray, silver, whatever you want to call it, on my machine, and I'm going to stitch the placement line. Once your placement lines have stitched out, you'll want to place your leather. I'm going to actually take the hoop off my machine and tape this and make sure it's nice and secure. Then I'm going to switch to this glow-in-the-dark gray for the tack down and the detail stitching. And once that's done, we trim after. I've got my glow-in-the-dark gray on the machine. I added tape to the side, the top, and the side. Hopefully that'll keep that in place. Let's stitch out the tack down and the detail. That's it for this block. You have to trim everything that's outside of your thimbles, and if you taped it, peel off your tape. Unfortunately, mine stitched over the tape in a couple tight spots. I'm going to have to get some tweezers for that. I'm going to pick this out while we start our next block, which is the sewing machine block, and then you'll get to see what this looks like at the end when we trim all our blocks together. Before we load the file, just want to show the sewing machine block has some options. You can see the different choices here. They did funny names instead of the real names, like here's Bernina, it's Boonina, Baby Lock, it's Batty Lock. You can pick whichever one you want. I loaded the one that says Singer, but I'm not going to stitch out the name. I'm going to show you something fun you can do instead. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to do this, but I'll walk you through it. Let me show you something you can do with this block. I'm going to load the embroidery and show you an option. All of these blocks have a funny name on it. If you don't want this, this is the last step when you're stitching it out. You can skip it, which is what I think I'm going to do. I'm going to stitch mine like this in the instructions. Just, plain. It's made of the black embroidery leather anyway. It's already going to look fancy. But if you like this detail at the bottom, you don't have embroidery software, let's say you want to add something to that. On my machine, this number 6 here has a number of decorative stitches. Number 1 has some great ones that actually do fit. I tried a few. 32 fits really nice. My favorite when I did this though was number 72, this one here. And the reason I liked this one the best was it had some curly lines, just like the curly lines here on the bottom. As it comes in, it's a little bit on the big side. It doesn't quite fit. You can hit edit, size. This button right here with all the arrows pointing in will shrink it down from all sides. That's as much as it can shrink it. And then you can take it and add it to your machine. You have to make sure you get it set on the machine. You can also use the little arrows to move it, like that. So if I liked this, I can stitch this out as a pretty detail on the machine instead of stitching the words. I just wanted to show you that option. I'm going to stitch mine completely blank, no words, no detail, but I thought this was fun if you want to add a special touch to it. Let's go ahead and load our files like normal. We're going to load our background quilting and then our sewing machine file. This file does load sideways, so it fits into the hoop, which is just fine. My machine automatically centers it. And you'll see my machine says Screamer. I picked the Singer file, but as we go through, that's the last thing that stitches out. I'm going to skip it. Before I start, I'm going to save this to memory. We've got a storm moving through. I don't think it's going to be a problem, and if I reset it, it should automatically put everything in the middle anyway. I'm going to do the beginning of this to music just like before, up through the background quilting. I have my neutral thread. I'm going to do my batting placement, batting tack down, trim, fabric placement, fabric tack down, and then I'm going to switch to the glow-in-the-dark green for my background quilting. Let me show you my background fabric. I picked this fabric with the pennants. This is a Kimberbell print. I've got my glow-in-the-dark green thread on. I'm going to do my background quilting. We had a huge storm blow through. I'm in Arizona. We just had like torrential rain, hail, craziness. I'll put some videos at the very end of this video today. That way if you want to see it, you can. Let's do our background quilting. Once your background quilting is stitched, the first thing we're going to do is stitch the knobs on the sewing machine. I'm stitching that in black. I'm using the black embroidery leather. If you're using a different color fabric, you can always do that in a different color thread. Next, we're going to stitch the placement line for our sewing machine. I'm going to go ahead and do that in black since the sewing machine is going to be in the black embroidery leather. Once the placement line is stitched, you can place your embroidery leather and stitch the tack down. The tack down line is stitched. Now I've got to trim everything outside of that line. I was not paying attention when I placed this. This stitching right here is just outside of the leather. I think it'll be fine. I'm going to go ahead and trim everything and then get in there and have a look at that. I've got that all trimmed. The next thing we're going to stitch is the thread. It looks like it's going to do a couple stitches here, so it makes it look like it's wound around this spool and then kind of go through the machine. I'm going to use this bright green. It's not the glow-in-the-dark green, but I think it'll show up better against the background. And I think I have a solution for this end that didn't quite get tacked down. We'll go over that after we're done stitching. The next step is the scroll work at the bottom. I'm going to use the gray glow-in-the-dark for that. I'm going to stop stitching this here. Now's the part where it stitches out the name if you want to stitch that out. Another thought on this, if you want a little detail here, you could stitch a little spool, a little heart, a little jack-o'-lantern, a little bat. You can just grab anything you want and drop it here. You could even stitch all along this part of the machine if you want to use a name or put Happy Halloween or something. But I'm going to stop with this right here. The stitching here of the thread helped tack this down. There's only a little bit here that wasn't caught under the tack down. I have some fabric glue. I can put a little bit underneath there and kind of squish it between the leather and the background fabric and then press it down and let it dry. Let's go ahead and go over to our cutting table and trim our blocks and then pull our fabric for next week. We've got no special trimming instructions this week. We can use orange popper rulers for everything. Let me show you the 3 pumpkins that I stitched since I only did one on camera. These are all going to trim 4.5 inches squared. So you can grab your 4.5 inch orange pop ruler, line it up with the lines, grab the next size out, whoop, upside down. I have little non-skid stickies on that. I'll link those below. I don't think I've ever linked that, so I'll link them below. I think they're called True Grips. That way if you don't have them on the back of your ruler, you can get them. They may come with the orange pop rulers. I can't remember. I've had these for a while. Once you've got everything lined up, just a quick reminder, when you're using the orange pop rulers, push it as far over to your left as possible, and then watch those fingers and go all the way around. A rotating cutting mat helps. The rulers and the rotating cutting mat will be linked below. I'll go ahead and cut the rest of the pumpkins to music. This block is the solid dress form. It's going to trim to 4.5 by 6.5. Grab your rectangle orange pop rulers. Same procedure. I'll set this to music. Our next block is the Thimble Flowers. I still have to get in there with some better tweezers and pick out some tape. Don't ever stitch over the tape with this like really thick detail stitching. It's very hard to pick out. This is also 4.5, 6.5, 6.5, 4.5, whatever you want to call it. Wow, I've got black thread on black fabric. That is kind of hard to see. An option is to flip it over. So if you have that same issue, if you can't see your stitching, try looking at it from the back. Our sewing machine block is going to trim to 6.5 by 8.5. Thought I'd show this. Remember how I show you I'm always saving the scrap stabilizer? This piece was scrap. It wasn't quite wide enough, so I sewed on a little bit extra. This is the middle ruler in the Orange Pop rectangle ruler set. And there is one more large ruler you can put on the outside to help with hand placement. Let's look at this part of this block. See that little bit that didn't quite get caught? I have some Eileen's Fabric Fusion Glue. This is the pen. I can squirt a little bit right there underneath and then press that down and let it dry. And then it can sit until we're ready to put it into the quilt. Let's pick our fabrics for next week. Next week will actually be in October. We're going to work on the wire dress form, sit and stitch, Quilt Shop, and Flying Geese. I went through and marked the quilting files. We've got one here in section 2, the Flying Geese. Over in section 5, you'll find the Quilt Shop. Under section 4 is the sit and stitch. It's sit and stitch a spell, and the wire dress form. I just caught this one. I've already turned off my camera, so I'm filming this on my phone for you. Here's another Flying Geese. There was one here in section 2, and there's one over here in section 6. Let's go through what we're going to need for next week. I'm going to start with the Quilt Shop because I'm pulling everything. This is the biggest pile of stuff. This block finishes to 8.5 by 10.5, so cut your batting 9.5 by 11.5. It uses a few things from the embellishment kit. No, I don't have anything cut yet, so you want to go ahead and refer to the instructions to get everything cut to the correct size. I've just pulled everything. The sign is going to use the white leather. The dormers are the black glitter vinyl. There's mylar and vinyl in this kit. The mylar is for flowers, vinyl is for windows. I can barely read my own handwriting. All of this is for my house. This is going to be my background fabric. My roof is going to be this fabric. For the house, I picked the purple with the bats, green door, and yellow windows. I will be putting fusible on the back of all of my fabrics. Next, we're going to look at the Flying Geese. We're going to make 2 of these. They're going to be trimmed 4.5 by 6.5, so cut your batting 5.5 by 7.5. My little note on the bottom is about the size of fabric you need for these triangles. In the instructions, it says 5.5 by 3, and I thought, I've got all these charm packs. Can I get away with 5 inches? So I put some scrap stabilizer on my machine. I stitched out the template. Here's 5 inches. Here's the furthest corners of those triangles. Easily fits. Easily can use charm squares for this. We're going to do 2 of these. I decided to do solid backgrounds. I'm doing one with purple. These are going to be the 3 triangles of the Flying Geese. And then one in orange. And those are the colors I picked for that. The Sit and Stitch a Spell block is 8.5 by 6.5. Cut your batting 9.5 by 7.5. From the embellishment kit, we're using some Flexi Foam and the Mustard Velveteen. So make sure to look at the instructions for cut sizes for these. The instructions also reference an iron away topping. I don't have iron away topping, at least I don't think I do. I know I have wash away. So, oh, there goes the thunder. I hope it picks that up. It's perfect for this. I'll be using something on this. If I don't have the iron away, I'll put the wash away on top of that. Here's my couch. And for the background, I decided to pick something darker because I've been using that white with the polka dots an awful lot, so I better balance it out with something else. That's what I have for this block. And again, I don't have everything cut yet. I just pulled everything. The easiest block to prep for is the wire dress form. This block is going to finish at 4.5 by 6.5. Cut your batting 5.5 by 7.5. All we're going to do is to stitch out. There is going to be a little skirt and a little belt that's in the embellishment kit. We'll be adding that at the end. Here's one last look of this week's blocks. Thank you so much for quilting along with me. Please come back next week for the next series of blocks. Make sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends. Comments or questions, please leave them in the comments box below. If you have any projects you'd like to see, please drop them in the comments for me. Thank you again for quilting with me. I'll see you next time.